Katie, Neal, I am so excited to be talking to you today. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then would love to chat with you about burnout in communications and how it's impacting our profession. So, would love to hear a little bit about you and your work.
Sure. It's so great to be here, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me. I am Katie Neal. I am a certified executive coach and award-winning communications consultant. I have spent over 20 years in PR and corporate communications, having worked in agencies from Sacramento, San Francisco, Singapore, leading the PR team at my alma mater, Wake Forest University, and having worked as an independent consultant as a vice president of communications and marketing in healthcare startups. So it's been a wonderful career. I've spent a lot of time in higher education, have a real heart for that. But about this time last year, I felt stuck. I wasn't sure what was going to be next for me. And I got really curious with that and realized that my favorite part about every single role that I've had has been helping other people navigate through their own professional and personal crossroads. And so I went back to school and became a leadership coach. And I've been doing that for about a year now. Currently, I focus on helping high achievers lead with intention and advance their careers. And so while my clients span identities and industries, I do tend to attract professionals in communications, marketing, and media, as well as high achieving women.
It's so funny that we scheduled this conversation because I posted something at the end of last week about burnout in communications and why we face it. And it's been getting a good amount of traction. And I think it's really resonating with people. Communications professionals are recognizing that they're burning out, but they're not totally sure why. And something I'm passionate about is pointing out some of these pieces of the comms profession that really lead to burnout for a lot of people, right? Why do you think burnout is so prevalent in our field? I mean, what is it about communications that is leading to these rampant rates of burnout that we're seeing?
Gosh, how long do we have? I mean, there are so many things about communications that contribute to burnout if they're not modeled or kept in check. So, for example, I mean, the news cycle and social media cycles 24/7. I mean, when I started my career, we didn't have iPhones. I remember being at our agency in San Francisco when they came out. And at that time, I had a BlackBerry and I really wanted it. I wanted to have access to my clients and all these things. And I look back on that now, like, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? But we didn't know what we didn't know back then, right? And so we're constantly on. We are problem solvers at the very nature of who we are and what we do. And that puts a lot of stress on a person when you're just constantly, maybe it's not even putting out fires, although certainly for some people, crisis comms is a predominant thing of what they do. But when you're constantly looking for solutions, trying to try new things, experimenting, all of that, like that's a lot of energy. And if you don't also take time to pause, reflect, relax, that will run you ragged.
I'm curious how this shows up in your clients. I mean, what are you seeing in these relationships you're building with these other communicators?
So I have one client who is a senior executive at a global PR agency, and her situation that she shared with me recently is both so messed up and so relatable. So she got sick. And in a way, she said it felt nice that she felt sort of relieved because it gave her a break. I mean, let's just sit with that for a minute. She got sick and she felt relieved, except here's the kicker. She was still working on a new business pitch. And so, on the one hand, she was able to maybe step back from her day to day client responsibilities, but she still had to push forward on this other project. And who hasn't been there? I've been there. I broke my ankle about a year and a half ago. And as soon as I got home from the doctor's office, I got a call and had to work on crisis comms all that night and through the weekend. And so I'm curious about why in comms industry we literally have to break ourselves to get a break. That's not right. Something has to change. And so in these coaching relationships, we explore and uncover what are the things that you can't change, right? If you're working at a big global agency, one individual, unless they're really at the top or at the C-suite level, is not going to be able to change that entire culture. But what is within her control? What is it she really wants and how can she get there? And so we talk through things like that all the time to ensure that at least within our sphere of influence that we are taking the steps that we can to protect ourselves and if we determine this isn't the right opportunity, to look for one that's more aligned with both our values and our experiences.
And how has it felt to go from a crisis communicator? Is it gratifying now to be able to shepherd communications professionals and other women leaders and executives through some of these challenges that you faced?
Yeah, it is gratifying, Natalie, and it's a huge breath of fresh air. I wish that I had turned to coaching as a PR professional sooner so that someone could have come alongside me, really ridden shotgun in my car and helped me with the GPS and asked me some insightful questions to get me to pause. I am terrible at pausing. Anybody who's ever worked with me on the comm side knows that I like to go fast. And I think we all know that there's a real dark side to that. Guess what? It made me great early in my career, in particular, because I was just constantly on the move. I was taking care of all of the boxes, but what I really was doing also was developing perfectionistic tendencies that were already kind of just innately wired in me, but really honing those and making those part of my routine. And yet at the same time, I never fully recognized my potential and my worth and my expertise in the room. So if you're familiar with imposter syndrome, I had that. And I really sometimes would find myself shrinking to just represent my perspective and just talk about this, but never fully taking up the space that I was hired to take up and leading in that way. And so now that I got curious with and really paused with the power of helping other people navigate through these crossroads that they're experiencing, it's really cup filling and rewarding. I mean, so every day I come to work and I lean into my core values: trust, communication, relationships, responsibility, achievement, and fun. Now, do all of those come into play every day, all day? Of course not. But every decision I make now is rooted in those.
Absolutely. Something I wrote in that post last week is that so much of our job as comms pros can be about putting out fires and mitigating risk and preventing the bad things from happening, but that can be hard to measure, and a lot of that work is invisible. And so, in some ways, the better you are at doing that, the less your work is seen. And I think it's this idea, and I'm sure you see this with some of the women you coach as well. It's this idea that our work speaks for itself. And I find that comms professionals are so humble and to a fault sometimes, right? I mean, we have to be comfortable with sharing our work and promoting ourselves a little bit, even though that feels gross. So what do you think about that?
Yes, all the things. I was just having a conversation with a communications professional that I really admire about communications professionals' celebration and humility. And I made 3 points to him. One, everything deserves to be celebrated, every win. It doesn't have to be a major piece of coverage or pulling off a big event. It could be just checking something off your to-do list that you had really been dreading or that was hard for you. It doesn't always have to be going out and taking a vacation or buying yourself something, which I think are two ways that sometimes we reward ourselves, but it could be small and micro, which my second point is it doesn't have to be public. Sometimes celebrating a win can be just sitting in your office and reflecting on, wow, what really went well about that? And what did I learn? What can I take into the future? But gosh, I did really well at these three things. Just taking even 3 to 5 minutes to pause and think about that is a way that you can reset before you just move on to your next goal, because I know that so many of us do that so often. There's plenty to do on the list, right? And so, it's easy to just, especially for high achievers, to just move from one goal to the next without giving it any thought. And then the third thing is sometimes it is okay to celebrate publicly. Like, if you think about the people that are the closest to you, they're always going to be cheering you on. And there can be this feeling of ickiness. And I think a lot of people talk about this with LinkedIn, right? Should I not? I know you've been passionate about that. How do you stand out on LinkedIn? Everything doesn't have to be look at me, look at me. But you can share lessons that maybe will help someone else and invite in a conversation and say, if you've been through a similar experience or had a similar victory, what did you learn from it? And then it enrolls the conversation while also saying, hey, I'm really proud of myself for this. And chances are the people who really care about you and are in your corner, they're also going to be proud of you.
Yeah, I love that. I think those are great tips because Even hearing of promotion, I've thought about that in my own messaging for my business. That doesn't necessarily resonate with people. So I think that's a really helpful way of making this accessible for people.
Well, and as PR professionals, we are so used to being behind the scenes, to helping our organizations, our executives, our SMEs shine. We're not usually part of the story. And in fact, a lot of us are former journalists. And so we were trained not to become the story.
Yes,
But especially if you're self employed or you're your own business, as you and I are, you really do have to take on and wear lots of hats. And sometimes that includes being the expert, celebrating your wins, and sharing those with the people that you are, helping and working to influence. And that's okay.
absolutely. Yeah, I keep a little victories list by the week for my business because I need
Yes.
to be reminded. Otherwise, I'll forget, you know?
What a great practice. And so just a habit to get into. I keep a thank you notes file, and sometimes I just go back and pull one randomly from someone that said something to me, and I'm like, gosh, okay, well, I might be feeling a little bit down today, but I really made an impact on this person with XYZ. And sometimes just that little lift is all you need to reframe, reset whatever's happening right now, and move forward and know that, okay, this might be a speed bump, but I'm on the right path.
Why do you think so many communications professionals feel this need to prove themselves continually, even if they're at a senior level? I mean, what is that kind of continual need to prove ourselves about?
Well, I think there are a few factors. I mean, one, just as industry specific, is the perpetual hustle that we find ourselves in. And this is an extremely volatile, uncertain, complex environment that we find ourselves in right now. And so client needs are changing, regulatory needs are changing, communication needs are changing, and everybody's literally keeping up day by day by day. What was working yesterday may not work today because the rules might have changed. So there's that we have to acknowledge. For female communications leaders, I mean, to your point earlier about the invisible work that often happens in our role, taking care of the meticulous detail planning, the strategy sessions that don't necessarily turn out into specific tactics that help inform how you approach a situation, even just the mentoring and the taking care of and modeling for earlier career staff members and team members who are trying to grow in their careers. So often those things fall on women. And then let's be real, for people who do have children or maybe other caregiving responsibilities, that often tends to fall on women. And so it is a real balance. I am 44 years old. I grew up in the 80s and 90s being told that I could do and be anyone that I wanted to be and to pursue all of the goals, and also being held to the standard of, well, my house needs to be clean and I need to also be involved with my kid and all of these different things. And it's like, oh my gosh, it sets an unrealistic standard, which is where I think perfectionism comes in, because we're trying to sometimes be all things to all people and do it in a way that just like, I don't really believe that work life balance is necessarily attainable. I prefer to think about it as work life integration, in terms of, what, we all have a pie chart and we've only got so much time or so much effort. And, they're just different slices of the pie and they may expand or contract depending on what's happening. But I have yet to achieve what I would consider a balance. Now, if you can find an integration that works for you, then maybe you could call that balance. It's all rhetorical at some point, but it is challenging. And people should not feel alone in that. And I love that we're talking about it more because it is real and it is something that female professionals think about a lot. And that doesn't change when they get more senior in their career.
I'm also curious about this concept of emotional labor that comes with comms. What is the toll of that emotional labor from your perspective?
So, women definitely take on a significant amount of the emotional labor of running a communications team. Not only are women disproportionately outnumbering men, although not in senior leadership positions in communications, but they're also often taking on a lot of those client relationships, the thinking about the scenario planning, ensuring all of the details are taken care of. All of these things, which piled on top of each other, can really create a significant amount of workload, both in terms of actual output, but then also just thinking about it a lot. I don't know about you, but I sometimes have a hard time disconnecting, and certainly have throughout the course of my career, my own identity and my work. And here's the reality: our work is not our worth. And so we have to disentangle those things in order to be able to move forward in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't just create so much overwork and so much emotional labor for ourselves, and that allows us to truly relax and reflect.
I think that's something interesting. It's not just about how we're spending our time, but it's how we're spending our energy, where we're devoting our headspace, allocating those resources in a way that does try to aim for some sort of balance or, to your point, integration. Something I'm really trying to do is manage my energy and lean into those moments of, oh, I'm really inspired about this. I'm feeling motivated to draft this long email. Let me do that, and following the lead of your own energy, I think, is really important.
And it's great. And as long as you also have those times where you unplug and you turn that off, then fabulous. So as long as you can work within those boundaries and parameters for yourself, who's to say that you shouldn't do that on a Saturday afternoon or a Thursday night or whenever it is, as long as you also are taking time to rest and reset?
So let's think about what it would look like to build a career in communications that doesn't end in burnout. How would you coach someone who maybe is mid career about how do we go into this next level of executive leadership, that period in a person's career, in a way that acknowledges that burnout is rampant in our field? How would you advise someone on being careful about that?
Well, I think the first thing that has to happen is this notion and this culture of perpetual hustle. Leaders really need to model what we want to see out of earlier career employees. And that includes taking your time off. When you say you're not going to be available, then really try to protect that boundary. Certainly, there are actual emergencies. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you didn't trust another team member enough to reply to an email while you're on a week-long vacation. Those are different scenarios, right? So if you're coming into the field, you want to be mindful of that and really listen to, when you're in a position to be interviewing perhaps multiple places, how people talk about things like that. Their words will tell you and their actions will too. Another thing to be thinking about is what's really important to you. It sounds simple, but what is it you really want? This goes back to values, right? And finally, I would say that someone looking to avoid burnout in their career should really get into a pattern of reflection.
Mm.
Really get in touch with yourself. Explore every X number of months, right? How am I doing? Not just towards my goals, but how am I feeling? Am I enjoying this? Look, jobs are a means to an end for most of us, right? We need to make money so that we can get paid and live a life that we are comfortable with and can meet our financial obligations. How do you make sure that you're on track with what it is not only that you want, but what you need? And then what adjustments do you need to make along the way? I think when you're really mindful about how your journey is going, then you can be much more intentional about decisions that come before you, even when you weren't expecting them.
And I think it is an opportunity for communications leaders to say, hey, we might do things a little bit differently here. We may not need to treat every issue that comes up as a full blown crisis, right? We don't have to be in that constant state of urgency all of the time. And I think that really is an opportunity for leaders. I talk about this with AI. Leaders are faced with this technology that they hear about at every conference they go to, and they go back to their teams and they're often worried about how do we implement this. They're overwhelmed. They don't really have time to devote hours a week learning this stuff. But it's really an opportunity to take a step back and reflect, to your point, about what can something like AI technology, what problems can it solve for me? And I see that here too with the issue of burnout. I mean, from my perspective, I like to think about AI and automation as ways to improve communicators' quality of life because it can take off some of those repetitive tasks that we don't really love to do, right? I mean, how awesome to be able to spend more time on creative and strategic work. And I really see this connection between the opportunities that we have with some of these technologies and this burnout that is unsustainable. And so, not to overhype AI, and I want to be clear-eyed about it and recognize it's full of bias and all these things we need to be aware of, but how can it take some things off of our plates that we don't really enjoy doing, right?
Exactly. And how can we be open minded about it and consider just dipping our toes in the water if it's a new type of tool?
I think about how particularly women do a lot of hedging around our value. I find myself doing that a lot. And even when I talk about AI, for example, I'm always like, well, I don't want to overhype it, or I'll talk about the value of LinkedIn and why I think people really need to build a LinkedIn presence. And it's like, I don't want to overhype it. I don't want to lean too much into it or oversell it, right? I think especially these women communicators who find themselves in leadership positions do a lot of that. And I was listening to a podcast episode you did recently about burnout, and you mentioned the compliment sandwich. And I think that's a great example of this, right? It's not saying what you want to say, it's trying to soften it. Could you talk more about that? Because I just find this really fascinating.
I was a very big perpetrator of delivering the compliment sandwich earlier in my career. And so what I mean is you take a piece of constructive feedback, something someone needs to do better, and then you bookend it with two compliments. And so for example, okay, Natalie, I loved the way that you worked the room at the event the other day. You just connect with people so well. I did notice that you left the registration table without any supervision for a while. And as a result, we didn't get everybody signed in. And now we don't have their emails to follow up with them. But again, great job introducing the speaker. You were just fabulous at that. So, hello, muddy message, right? So, on the one hand, sounds like you're wonderful at relational gifts and you are making people feel comfortable, welcome, all the things that are really important. But I also told you that you didn't meet the expectations of one level of your job. So, which message did you hear? It's likely that you didn't hear either one fully, and they both deserve attention. And so, instead, if we could say, hey, Natalie, let's have a conversation about the event, what went well, and what we can work to improve upon in the future. Here is what I saw that you did that really shined XYZ. In the future, it would be better if you could do this. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? And so you clearly heard a delineation rather than just trying to mix it all up and make it feel good. When the truth is, you didn't meet part of the expectation of your job. That's not mean. That's actually kind because it's clear and it gives you, and this is especially important for high achievers, right? Like they are always looking to improve. It gives you something meaningful and measurable to focus on next time. And so, great. None of us is going to be perfect, nor should we expect to be. Another thing that I think a lot of female leaders in particular do is with our language. Sometimes we use words like just or I'm sorry, but no, and I've probably done it in this conversation, but those words diminish our message. It gets back to that shrinking, right? Well, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's going to be very popular with our customers. Our research shows that our customers do not like when we make decisions like XYZ. Just say it and back it up. Own the room that you were hired to take up. And if we do these things and we amplify each other's messages, we can break through some of those barriers that at times hold women back. Let's not contain ourselves within those fences.
And what a great opportunity for communications leaders to apply their comms skills and savviness to their leadership, right? Of course, if the message is muddy, it's not going to land and it's not going to achieve
Right.
the goal you're trying to achieve. So, what an opportunity to lead in a super effective way because they can rely on these comm skills that they've spent years building.
Exactly. Clear communication does not have to come with a character assassination. So we have to get past these often gender stereotyped norms about communication, being a boss versus being bossy, being bold versus being bitchy, and look at leadership through the lens, not through the gender of the leader.
So, Katie, I want to make sure we have time to talk about your What the 40s group that you run. It sounds like it's a cohort group, and I'm really interested in just learning more about what you offer.
Yes, thank you so much for asking about WTF. It is a small group, 8 to 10 women coaching program for high achieving women in their 40s. And so, this is a really pivotal decade in a lot of people's lives. You may or may not have caregiving responsibilities across the spectrum, up or down. You may be like me, fairly senior level in your career, but only mid career in age and trying to figure out what in the world am I going to do for the next 20 or 30 years. You may be trying to figure out what's next. I'm stuck, or I just want more out of life. I hear a lot about burnout. And so together we work through everything from we start with values, right? It builds on that and making sure that people understand what it means to be fulfilled for them. We dig into fears a little bit. What are they afraid of? We make sure to talk about fun, about relationships. And finally, we put together a roadmap over the course of 6 weeks for their own future. And so women have called it a light bulb moment because it's just a great, I mean, who hasn't felt lifted up by like really close friends and people that they've gone through an experience, a transformative experience with? And so it's one of my very favorite things to do is just lead women on this path that we're all walking through together. And in fact, I'm starting to ideate on another group coaching session geared at maybe the decade before that. So details to come on that because I think there are so many things in that formative decade in your 30s or even late 20s that if you can take a few steps and really be thoughtful about how you're approaching work and life then, that will set you up for a career that I hope will have much less burnout, will have much less overwork or less stickiness of what is going to be next for me. So stay tuned for that. One of the things I want to share is the power of being able to sit with someone and help them work through whatever it is. One of the biggest pieces of feedback I get about people's first experience with coaching is that they've never had a concentrated, safe space for them to really be able to talk about their challenges. And so to listen to a senior comms exec be able to talk about political issues that he's navigating in the workplace, to be able to speak with an early career employee who's still working on gaining her confidence when it comes to managing clients, and talk about those outside of the parameters of this person's my boss, and so they might judge me this way, or this is my colleague, but there's probably going to be a promotion that one of us is going to get later, can just be a really safe and confidential space to work through your challenges while also ensuring that you're making decisions in line with your values and with your future goals in mind. So, if anybody is interested in connecting, I'd be happy to have a complimentary strategy session to talk about and explore whether it's time to invite someone into your car and ride shotgun with you.
I love that. Your messaging is on point, Katie, and
Thank you.
it's really yeah, you're clearly a communications expert, and it's been such a joy to talk to you today and to connect the dots between issues and challenges that communications executives are facing and how that relates to some of the trends we're seeing in our profession. So, such a joy to have you, and I'm really grateful for your time.
Thank you. I really admire all of the work that you're doing. And thank you for opening up a conversation about burnout and so many of the other things we're dealing with. It's important more now than ever.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Katie.